Hello. This is the first time I'm ever doing this sort of thing with recording voiceover over a time-lapse video, but I thought it might be interesting to talk about the process as I'm going through it. So here we go. You see I started by laying in turpentine wash with a burnt umber or raw umber, basically using a rag to wipe out the basic shapes of the composition. There's probably going to be a few times where I'm trying to figure out how to explain what I'm doing. Buckle up, this is going to be like 19 minutes. This is one of the most largest paintings I've done in quite a while. So anyways, after that first layer dried, I went over it with a liquid wash or glaze of raw sienna, it looks like, and then wiped out some highlights. Now I'm going into this main shape of the train and basically drawing in the parts of the train, which is like the cattle catcher and the locomotive bulkhead or whatever you call it, and all the mechanisms of the train, so I can get all the drawing laid in. But as I start out with the main shapes, it's not that hard to figure out where to place these things. It just kind of gives me an indication of where I'm going to go back in and describe the form with more solid approaches with paint later on. So, as you can see, I'm just kind of going through all that there. So, where are we at? Alright, so now I'm just going to start somewhere. I start with the front part of the train, describing the way those shapes are laid in, or the way they look, the form, structure, all that kind of stuff. If you hear a lot of background noise, please forgive me. My chair is squeaky. My neighbor decided to play a lot of loud music. I don't know if that's going to get picked up on this mic. But, still going through, alright, just basically laying in the local color. There's a lot of neutral tones. One of the things I decided to do in this painting was to work with the earth tone palette. You might see that a little bit on the bottom left hand corner. So basically it's raw sienna, burnt umber, yellow ochre, raw sienna, and burnt sienna. Actually, burnt sienna is that orangish color that you see in the background of the painting that I laid in with a mixture of liquid and linseed oil. Liquid is a painting medium that you can get at pretty much any art supply store, and it's generally used to thin down paint, to do glazes and whatnot, and I use it with a mixture of linseed oil, mostly liquid and a little bit of linseed oil to slow the drying down. Liquid tends to dry fairly quickly, so you can lay in some paint and then paint basically be dry the next day for you to work into it. Alright, so here I'm laying in the other characters in the painting basically by painting around them, so they had a darker shape in the background, and I'm painting the light around them. What I'm trying to do with this painting is make it look like there's a group of riders under the shadow of the smoke coming off the train. This whole idea for this painting was generated excuse me, by doing some sketches downtown. I went out with my neighbor, and we would bring a sketchbook and a Sharpie, and the goal was to fill a 50-page sketchbook in one night with Sharpie drawings, just walking around downtown LA. And a lot of the drawings ended up being really cool, and one of the things that I noticed as I started drawing these buildings as almost like personalities. They were like monuments. And so I thought it would be interesting to take a point of view in this painting where you're looking up at this train as some sort of monumental thing. It's almost got its own personality. And so back to my point, while I was doing these drawings, one of the drawings I did was a bunch of people standing around at a train station in the dark. It was dark, and it was in a really sketchy neighborhood, and it's like, man, it's shady here, and they were standing under the shade, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if you were going to rob a train, not to go down, chase it down, but just wait for it to show up into town, and have a bunch of people standing in the shade waiting for you in a shady neighborhood. So that's kind of where the genesis of this painting came from. Alright, so back to just basically laying in details of the train, going over highlights, making basically what I did first was somewhat of an underpainting, just basically describing the structure value. And by structure value, I mean the lights and darks and how it looks in light, and I wasn't worried about it being the right exact color just yet. Um, and now I'm going back over and laying in more of the grays. And one of the ways I'm achieving this shift from the warm earth tones to the cooler gray tones is I'm using a color called indigo blue, which is made by Winsor Newton, I believe. And it's a very, very dark but subtle blue color. And when you mix it with some of those darker earth tones, it makes a nice sort of cool steely color. So I'm just going back and painting more of the details of the train, the wheels and the linkage and all that kind of stuff, trying to make sure that it looks right. One of the things that's a challenge in creating paintings of like machinery or weapons or pistols is that you don't have the same latitude that you might have when you're painting like a tree or a person. Like if it's not straight, it looks wrong. Like mechanical things have to look mechanical and rigid. There's not a lot of distortion you can do in the sort of rubbery way that I do with people. I think that's probably some of the fun in doing it is that trying to trying to still push perspective and distortion and sort of give you a dreamy reality here without making it look like it's a complete cartoon. Making something that looks like it's made of like heavy steel. It's big. So again, just really going through the painting, just one place to one place to one place. Trying one of the ways that I keep the color consistent through the painting is again by using just a consistent palette. So everything is made of the same basic colors. What I'm working with mostly is trying to create it's a lot of gray tones, so that it looks like a yellowish reddish tone. But really, what I'm trying to do, or what I'm how I'm achieving that is by the subtlety of grays. So outside of the earth tone colors on my palette, like I mentioned before, I've been really liking to use a series of grays by Gamblin called the Portland grays, Portland gray light, medium, and dark. And it's a way of getting around using any sort of black or white on the palette. So I generally don't have any black or white that I'm working with. The lightest color I have would be a Portland gray light or a Naples yellow or some sort of facsimile of Naples yellow, because Naples yellow is hard to get due to the pigmentation being outlawed in the state of California, I believe. So the trick here for me was trying to make this look like they're in the shade, and I think I was fighting myself a lot in trying to keep them in this sort of brownish tone, like, and separating them from the background, as you'll see as I start laying that in later. So the approach of creating this sense of depth is basically the basics of landscape painting, and I approach all of my paintings as a landscape in the sense of how I create space and structure and form. So the things in the background tend to be lighter, more obscured, less contrast in the shadows versus lights, and they tend to be grayer and less saturated. So as they go closer to the horizon, the color of the sky will get lighter and warmer or grayer, and as it goes up higher, it'll be the opposite. And the same things with the characters and the things on the ground. The things that are closest to you generally have the strongest contrast and shadows. But again, I'm trying not to push things to black because things generally don't look black. Even in the shadow areas, you can see things and see light. So I'm going through and basically building some detail on the horses here, and you're gonna watch me go through this several times. I really was trying to figure out how to make these visually look like they're in the right space in the spatial reference from the train to the eventual structures that are in the background. So there had to be a foreground, which is the train, the middle ground, which is the characters on the horses, and then the background, which you'll see later as I lay it in. And then the smoke coming off the top of the train had to look like it was going over these characters and casting a shadow, as the source of daylight in the painting is almost directly straight above. As you can see on the face of the train, the shadows from the whatever that nonsense is on the front of the train, the light and whatnot, is casting a cast shadow straight down. So it's almost like a high noon. So trying to make the clouds and the people look like they're in the same spatial plane coming off the side of the train. One of the other things to make this look believable in in a bizarro, even if it's in a bizarro way, was the perspective. So the main perspectives I took were from the train, and that's how I figured out how to place the people and how to place the buildings and what angles to make them look at. And a lot of this again was based on numerous sketchbook drawings of buildings and cityscapes in downtown LA. I think I'll probably post some uh, JPEG. I'll post some pictures of those sketchbook drawings later. I've put them on my social media a few times, and I might have archived them. I don't remember. Anyway, so the buildings that I'm drawing in here were based off sketchbook drawings I did on a trip to Reno and back, where I was getting reference for the trains and for the people on the horses and all that kind of stuff. So it was based on an old gold town called Bodie, California, and it was an old gold mining town. It's been deserted and for probably over 100 years, and it's now become I think a state park. And so basically it's just a small town with a bunch of brown looking raggedy old buildings falling apart. And so I did a bunch of sketches while I was there, and I used those as the sort of the basis of the facade of the buildings. Pardon me. So one of the experiences I had in going to Reno and back in Carson City is it was the same time all the wildfires were happening in the Sierra Nevadas, and all that smoke was coming over the mountains into the valley between Reno and LA. And it was a really apocalyptic looking scene with yellow skies and like a reddish looking sun. It was really sort of eerie. And I thought, this is what I want these paintings for the series that this belongs to have. This sort of, everything's on fire somewhere else. And I'm pretty happy with how that came out. And again, like I said, it was mostly a use of earth tones and grays with very limited other pigmentations. I think I used a little bit of cadmium red light in some of the clouds and is it like light poking behind the buildings or something. And the indigo blue, which has got a blue tone to it. And yeah, so here we go. Still really pushing and pulling the distance between the buildings in the background and the people. And also I have to keep in mind the light source, where if the light is coming and hitting the facade of those buildings, because some of those buildings are facing the same way as the train. So in logical frame of reference, the light would be hitting that front facade. And although I had some references for the buildings, it was just my sketches. Primarily, I'm just making them up. I'm not really concerned with them having a real sense of reality so much as the train does. As the focus of this painting is the train and the machinery there. So after I've laid everything in, then I start going back into doing details. So I'm starting to lay in all the nuts and bolts and guide rails and all the stuff that's on the front of the train. If I had tried to paint all this simultaneously, I think it would have just been tedious and very difficult to do. So I really focused on the main underlying form and structure, and then the detail has to sit on top of that. So what you don't want is something that has a lot of detail, but the detail doesn't describe the form and structure. It gets, you don't want your detail upstaging the underlying object of what you're painting. And detail stuff is kind of the things that I don't like to do the most. I like the beginning parts of the painting where things really come together, like the first half, and then the very end of just kind of tidying it up is kind of fun, but the detail stuff isn't where I get the most joy out of this. So now I'm just going back and detailing these characters. I spend a lot of time on this painting and these people. Like if I was to do this painting over again, I would probably do it in half the time, just because now I know how I want to approach these characters and how I would lay it in. So I did learn a lot by doing this and trying to capture the sense of space, which makes more sense towards the end of the painting, I think. Yeah, I hope you'll agree. You see what I'm talking about. So basically, popping some of these characters out, pushing other ones back. Again, using an atmospheric perspective to make the characters in the background more obscure and lighter in color and less detail. And I think at first when I was approaching this, I wasn't sure how much, if I was going to put any detail on these characters, if they might just be silhouetted, but I felt that that was probably just a little bit of laziness if I did that. You tend to see things even when they're in shadow. They don't just get obscured into flatness and dark. So one of the pains in the ass for this was painting in between their legs. I guess if I was smarter, I would have painted the entire background and painted them on top of it, but I like to make things kind of come together at once so I can see. I guess I wouldn't have known where to put all that stuff in the background if I didn't have them there already there. So I tend to like kind of bring things into existence simultaneously to have the frame of reference. Like if I don't know what I can do in the foreground until I have something in the background and vice versa. And I generally find that painting is mostly a contrast of polar opposites, a foreground and a background, red versus green, white versus black, all that kind of stuff. So it's trying to decide what your foreground and what your background is. As you can see, I go back and forth on this quite a bit, I'm really sort of just guessing what's going to make this. And I have an idea before I start going at it, and then I do it, and then I sit back and I decide if it worked, and every time so far I think, well, this could work better. And that's really what I'm getting at, is I just keep working on something until it looks like I want it to look, or as close to what I can get to what I imagined is possible. The other challenge is painting the horses. I haven't painted a whole lot of horses, ironically, and I wanted them to be sort of stylized too, with long legs, and I just had this idea of long-legged horses and horse riders, and can't quite tell who they are. They're masked. They got long hair. They might be women, actually. You don't know if these characters are here necessarily, if they're here to rob the train, if they're here to greet. There's not a lot of explanation, and there's a good story there, but so again, I'm laying in smoke. I'm laying in all the steam coming off the train. I really wanted this train not to look like it was zooming by, like maybe it was just pulling up or it was slowing down. So using the way I painted in the steam is a way of describing that, because the steam isn't trailing behind it. So the smoke's coming off the top and going to the side. The steam's kind of coming out and flooding the floor. And it gives an indication that this train is static. It's not moving right now. But this painting was a lot of fun to make, and it's, I think, one of the best paintings I've ever done. Probably has lots of room for improvement like other paintings, but it turned out it has the quality that I was going after. It has an emotional quality. It it works in a lot of ways, I think, and I'm pretty pleased with it. Well, feel free to comment, ask questions about this. Like I said, this is the first time I've ever done a recording voiceover for one of these videos. If it's something you'd like to see in the future, or if there's things you'd like to hear me talk about when I'm making these paintings, feel free to ask, and I'll try to include them in other ones. So thanks so much for being a part of it. And all right, till next time.